Welcome to Tasting with the Malt Guild. We're talking to Chip Tate right here from Balcones Distillery in Waco, Texas.
Right. Nice to be with you, Balcones. Well, we're actually here on the Balcones fault line. People associate Balcones a lot with west of here in the hill country of Texas, which is also right. It's all part of the Balcones escarpment. And without getting too technical, we've got two plates. The western tectonic plate folds underneath the eastern one, and that rock face creates a lot of the aquifers that feed the springs that flow up into Waco, which is, basically the spring water that we're using to dilute down the whiskey in the whiskey making process. Well, I guess it's a long story. There's two different tracks, I guess. Professionally, I've done a whole bunch of this and that and everything. I've done anywhere from nuclear physics to philosophy to academic administration to insurance to some craft brewing and, all over the map. But my interests really have always been in fermentation. I got really serious about cooking and especially baking when I was a young teenager, and then I brewed kind of out of control home brewer, sometimes craft brewer for about 16, 17 years, and had originally intended on starting a craft brewery here in Waco, and got delayed for lots of different personal reasons. Long and short, when I finally got around to it, I really found myself being more of a whiskey drinker who liked beer versus a beer drinker who liked whiskey, and got it in my head it would be a cool thing to try to create a Texas whiskey tradition. So I said, I'll found a distillery, and off we went. So I guess another way to put it is the vocational interest has been somewhat linear, but all the background that led me up to being able to do the distillery was kind of all over the map, We weren't the first distillery in Texas. There were several others, actually, in whiskey. Garrison Brothers had already started producing. They didn't have anything out. I won't say that I was producing anything before I had my distiller's license, of course, because that would be illegal. But then, there are other distilleries that, some of which base their spirits in, neutral grain spirit they purchase. Others, Treaty Oak is using, making a white rum. I think they're also making some other rum. So there were 5 or 6 others doing other things, but there wasn't anybody doing whiskey in the sense that somebody had a distillery that was up and going and releasing bottles, So we were among the first, I would say, but we did release the first Texas whiskey, at least since Prohibition, at least since, first legal Texas whiskey, we'll say that. The general idea of our corn whiskeys is that bourbon is kind of like barbecue. The meat that goes into barbecue is important, but the dominant flavors are more about smoke and spice and everything else. And bourbon's kind of similar. It's primarily made from corn, but the dominant flavors have a lot more to do with the fermentation and the yeast and the barrel and so forth, the maturation. So I got it into my head it would be cool to do a corn whiskey that was all about the flavor of the corn. And not, a moonshine, that's not what we wanted to do, but an aged, refined corn whiskey that was really based around the richness of corn. So tasted through a bunch of corns and settled on a roasted blue corn as having the richest flavor for the whiskey. We're trying to make something that's really rich, that has all of the best characteristics of the ingredients from which it's made, but also is quite smooth and is using the barrels to simply mature, not sort of fix or smooth the whiskey out. It's fairly easy to do one or the other. It's fairly easy to make rich whiskey or really smooth whiskey, but it's much more of a challenge to make something that is both rich and smooth off the still. Our cooperage program is probably the most complex aspect of the distillery. So the simple answer to your question is yes. We use small barrels, we use big barrels, we use 20-liter barrels, we use 15-gallon barrels. We do a lot of work with 60-gallon barrels, which is traditionally more associated with the wine business. We use some ex-bourbon barrels for aging. Most of the barrels that we get in are new when they come to us, but we'll use them for different things 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and not just to save money, but there are a lot of advantages. You know, people who appreciate Scotch know that whiskey made in second fill barrels is not necessarily inferior. You know, it's a different thing. So I also have a very specific specification that is different in lots of ways from a standard bourbon barrel in terms of what I want. Very high quality wood is the simplest way to put it, but we're talking, you know, all fine grain, all fully yard aged, not 2 or 3 months, 2 or 3 years. You know, custom toast profiles. I specify the number of pieces that can be in the barrel and the thickness of the staves and the precision of the char, the difference between the staves and the heads, and, you know, on and on and on and on. And most of that's American, some of it's French, and some of it's European. Actually on one of 2 blending tables. It's not much. It's pretty much just a square piece of wood. But the table you can kind of see behind you is another one of those, because I'll go through 100, 200, even 300 whiskeys over several days to pick as few as 20, as many as 60 or 70 to go into a blend. And, you know, most of the whiskey will actually see multiple barrels over time. It's a lot more like a brandy distillery that way. We'll form cuvées, we'll dump things out, let them get a little air, mix them together, put them in different barrels at a slightly different proof. It's a very complex process to try to craft month by month the maturation for whiskey, because every barrel and every situation is different, and so you've got to take different measures at different points. Sort of, is what I always say. You know, the 2 stills that we use, we actually bought some stills from somebody else, and we intended to be able to go ahead with those. You know, it's kind of like buying the old classic car where you only intend to do a little bit here and there. Mm-hmm. It was a little bit more than a little bit. We were able to keep 2 parts of the still. We, you know, replaced the bottom, rejoined the shoulders and the belly, replaced the manways, replaced the column, replaced the sight glasses, replaced the neck, replaced the line arm, replaced the condensers and the spirit safe. So simply put, yeah. But, you know, full disclosure there are 2 other stills I actually haven't put online because of heat that we actually did build entirely from scratch, just because it's actually easier that way. You know, we got big 10-foot by 4-foot sheets of copper and cut it into chunks and beat it out and welded it together. So, you know, that's a little easier to do than redoing work, I've come to find out. But the custom nature of our stills in terms of reshaping things and reinventing a traditional pot still to a certain degree. I mean, they're still pot stills. Our stills are about 5 or 6 feet tall. They have a 20-foot line arm at a 20-foot angle up. That's important. It means that, you know, it flies very differently, so to speak. You know, it's like a plane with really small wings and really huge flaps. You can make it do a lot of different things, which is important in terms of how I distill. There are times I want it to run really rich, and there are other times I want a much more refined spirit. We're also in Texas, so there are times when the room is quote-unquote normal temperature, and there are times when it's pretty hot, even with the air conditioning. You know, we use direct fire right now, and even with the air conditioning, it'll be 95 degrees in the room, and that affects how it still performs. So all those things help us kind of craft the nature of the spirit. I founded the distillery in March 2008. Okay. As we built, we talked about the stills, but I mean, we built or rebuilt the fermenters, you know, replaced the roof and the plumbing and the electric. It took us about a year to build the building out. So it wasn't until spring of 2009 that we were distilling and then released the first whiskey in that fall. So, you know, it's basically been a little over 4 years, I guess. No, 3 years, sorry, that we've been distilling in this.
Yeah. Wow. What a journey.
Yeah, it has been.
What a journey.